denying our public safety crisis is a deadly endeavor. Let's get to it in our segment, Unbelievable. Boop. All right, this is a story that was kind of happening while we were taking the week off while I went to see my sister. But you've seen the video by now, I'm sure. So the Seattle Police Department is looking for help from the public to identify a man who, armed with a hammer at a light rail station, attacked two elderly strangers. This story was, I mean, first of all, it's obviously heartbreaking. And I don't know what it is about a hammer. I don't know what it is. I mean, we've seen people attacked all sorts of ways, shot, stabbed, whatever it is. I don't know what it is about the prospect of being beaten with a hammer. This is not the first story we've seen in Seattle of someone who clearly has some mental issues attacking a completely innocent person, or in this case, persons, with a hammer. But this was, oh my gosh, this story was, and we'll show you a little bit of the video just because he's clearly identifiable. I mean, if anybody knows this guy, you can obviously tell who it is. So this is some really good video. But it was two elderly strangers. And one of them was a veteran in a wheelchair. And he actually tried to step in and protect the elderly woman who got attacked with a hammer, even though he was in a wheelchair. I mean, that man is a hero, an absolute hero. His name is Doug Krogel. But so Seattle police looking for this guy, but I just couldn't help but notice. First of all, does it surprise any of you who watch this show, who are, approaching the crime crisis in Seattle with common sense and with an understanding of how bad it is? Does it surprise any of you to hear that, there's concerns over public safety on public transit after those? No. We've been talking about it for a long time. We know that there have been issues with public safety on transit. This has been going on for years. If you've ever stepped foot on a light rail train, if you've ever stepped foot on a bus, I would be shocked if you felt safe on certain routes. I mean, I'm going back to 3 years ago during the pandemic when they weren't enforcing fares because it was racist. It's like, what do you think is the natural result of not enforcing fares, of not having a strict law enforcement or private enforcement effort? And then, of course, we talked about the drug den that buses and light rail stations have become. And then King County absolutely denying that a UW study that found that there was widespread drug contamination on trains and buses was a big deal. But they're like, it's still safe. We're like, 100% of samples that were airborne tested positive for meth. What do you mean it's safe? So we've just been gaslit on how truly bad the safety crisis is on public transportation. Then you have outlets like King 5. This is their headline after this hammer attack story. Safety top of mind for Sound Transit riders and employees after unprovoked hammer attack. You don't say. I mean, we've been saying this for years. What drives me nuts is the denial and the downplaying of what is clear to see when it comes to what has become a truly unbelievable public safety crisis on public transportation. Until what? A guy attacks two elderly people with a hammer, and then we're all like, we need to do something about the public safety crisis on public transportation. It's like, of course you do. We've been saying that for years. It's common sense. They've turned into drug dens. We have a mental health crisis that is completely out of control, and you're acting surprised that some guy, mentally ill man with a hammer attacked two people? Like, where have you been? And Nicole, did you have something you wanted to say?
This is their concern now.
Right.
So just so everybody knows, don't be afraid to ride Sound Transit because they're really worried about you now.
Yeah,
finally.
And now they're upping security and stuff. And it's like,
right.
Okay, security, this is, again,
this
the same
is not
agency
the first attack.
That's like, we're going to pull back. Security's not going to, not going to confront people who haven't paid for fares. What kind of environment did you think that was going to foster? What kind of environment have your policies and your position on these things fostered? I mean, this isn't even close to the first attack that's happened on light rail and the buses. It's horrible.
And this man is obviously not mentally well. He's wearing a dress, walking around with a hammer, waving it at people, shouting at people in the thing. And this is over a time period. And I'm sure that he got reported prior to the actual attack, and there's nobody around to help. Like, they don't have any security leading up to this, apparently, because somebody should have stepped in earlier.
Yeah, and then King 5 saying, Sound Transit has permanently increased security staffing at 9 of 10 stations. Onboard security has increased 211%.
Oh, well, I hope that the one station that doesn't get security.
I wonder which one that is, right?
Yes.
But again, this is how the government works. It's like, once it's so bad that people are dying or people's lives are at risk, then we'll throw everything in the kitchen sink at it. Where it's like, okay, if you had used your brain, common sense, realized, okay, we've got a mental health crisis, we've got a drug crisis, this is obviously going to pour onto public transportation, common sense tells us that, and dealt with it in a meaningful way, in a strict way, taken it seriously from the beginning, you wouldn't have to, on the back end, be increasing security by 211% because it never would have got so bad to begin with. And this is, again, the denial and the apathy that Seattleites have shown. We're going to have another segment on that coming up momentarily. The denial and apathy that Seattleites have shown on the crime crisis. This is the natural result of that, where it gets so bad that now Sound Transit's like, oh, we got to increase security at 9 of 10 stations and increase onboard security by 211%.
But why isn't the story what led up to the lack of safety provided to these people? Yeah. Because again, it's just the media kind of playing into like, here's our statement, just read our statement, tell people 100%. It's top of mind, and not, hey, this is what led up to all 155 attacks this year. That's but let's just feel safe when we go anywhere in Seattle and get out of your cars because we want you to be in this situation every day.
You're 100% right on that, because what it is it's press release reporting. It's not journalism, it's regurgitation.
Yep.
It's like, oh, hey, somebody got attacked with a hammer. Let's take what Sound Transit says and let's just put that in a story and call it journalism. That's not journalism. Journalism, like you said, being a watchdog of government, which should be the fundamental responsibility of the media, is to go to Sound Transit and say, hey, how did you allow it to get so bad where you have to increase security by 211%? What about this policy, this policy? What about these anti-racist policies that led to this, proliferation of people on Sound Transit who haven't paid to be there and haven't paid to be on buses? What about all that? But King 5 won't do that. They're not going to question, anything having to do with race. They're not going to question Sound Transit's decision not to do fare enforcement because it was racist. That's not journalism.
I don't know how it got like this.
Journalism?
Oh, yes.
Or Sound Transit?
No, well, both. I know how Sound Transit got it the way it is because that's politicians, and I just don't understand how journalism has kind of sunk this far, because it really has. And I mean, good journalists like you have been leaving to do other things because you can't be part of that environment anymore, and that's sad too, right?
And there are some good ones.
I don't know how it got.
I'm not going to act like there are no good journalists in Seattle. There are a handful. At most of the stations, there at least is one, I would say. But when you have that big of a platform, I mean, I can say, I'm not going to turn this into a segment about the downfall of journalism. Part of it is staffing. There are some elements of it that aren't as nefarious as you might think. Laziness and staffing and young reporters who are getting paid not jack to be there.
Pay is a big thing.
They're turning and burning stories. Sound Transit sends a press release saying it's increasing security. Let's just throw it online. Let's move on with their lives. They don't have the time. They don't have the energy. They're not being given the time and energy to pursue stories in the way that journalists used to pursue stories. So some of it is just the complete decline of journalism for a variety of reasons. But a lot of it is bias.
I think it's bias, and I also think it's the problem right now with a work ethic. So I think there's a huge lack of work ethic in the generation that's in this age range, right? Like 20 to even 40. I mean, there's a work ethic problem, and people need to be reminded that there's something you gain from that, not just money, but you gain like pride, and there's a lot to be gained from a good work ethic. And right now people are just working to work.
What's the bare minimum I can do?
What's the bare minimum?
When you're doing the bare minimum in a career like journalism, then you belong in a different career, because the power that journalists have to influence what's happening, to literally save lives. If you had outlets that were down the throat of Sound Transit every step of the way and of our elected leaders in Washington State to tell them, again, for the last 5 years, as this crime crisis has been increasing, do you think if media outlets like King 5 were down the throat of elected leaders, asking them to account for how things got so bad, for these stupid, nonsensical policies like defund the police? I mean, since 2020, do you think we'd be in this crisis if the media was doing its job? Absolutely not. We would not be in this crisis, and voters would be well informed enough to not vote in the people who are pushing the exact same policies who got us here to begin with. All right, Nicole, thank you.
Yeah.
Again, we'll have a segment that I think is very similar in terms of us ignoring, not you, of the powers that be and politicians and the media ignoring these crises for so long that then something really bad happens, and now all of a sudden we want to scramble and be like, oh, we got to do something about this. Absolutely ridiculous.